Hello, hello, and welcome to Tuesdays with Terry. So, today I wanted to talk about the story of two wolves. So, which wolf are you feeding? That's what we're going to be talking about. And if you haven't heard this story, I'll just remind you real quick. So, there was an old Cherokee chief, and he's talking to his grandson one evening, and he tells them about the battle that's going inside of people. This is the battle of two wolves. So one of the wolves is evil. And so he thinks of lies and jealousy and anger and hate and ego. And the other wolf is the good wolf. And he thinks of love, peace, serenity, all the good things, all the positive things. And then the grandson thinks to himself and he says, well, which one wins? So the wolf that wins is the one that you are feeding. That's what the chief said. And so that's really an important thought that I just remembered today. I've heard this story before, but I don't know, it just hit me different today. And so which wolf are you feeding? Are you feeding the good wolf or are you feeding the evil wolf? And so you'll know that by the thoughts that you're thinking. And so recently, you guys might know that I started teaching A Course in Miracles at Unity in San Francisco. And I've been studying it just this year, and I love it. So I found out that so good is going to win, and I'm not even talking about wolves anymore, but God and the ego. So we already know that God's going to win, but on a moment-to-moment basis, which one are you feeding? Are you feeding your love and peace, harmony, thoughts, or are you feeding the ego and jealousy and hatred? So this is the story of two wolves. If you heard it before, definitely let me know. And then when I was thinking about the story of the two wolves, a couple thoughts came to mind. So the first one was the Wolf of Wall Street. That's when he starts pumping his chest. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, so I love that movie, and so in that movie, they're feeding the ego. And it's always good to recognize which one you're feeding. And if you are feeding the ego, then you want to make sure that you recognize it. So if you are getting in a negative self-loop pattern, which one of the ladies at our study last night, she was, telling the same story, because we were talking about our lessons and our breakthroughs and she just had a lot of forgiveness lessons that she needed to do. But, what was happening to her, what seemed to happen to her, she, anyone would say is warranted. But what happens is when you are feeding those negative thoughts, you're only hurting yourself in the end. So they always say, when you're holding a grudge or angry at someone, that's like holding a hot coal. And you're the one that's burning. You're burning yourself by holding on to that. So when you're forgiving, you are forgiving so you can release yourself to live at peace. And you're not condoning the situation, but you're knowing that you're really you're setting yourself free. So that was a great lesson on feeding the wolves, and which wolf you're feeding. And then so another thing, so I wanted to bring a couple tactics here. If you find yourself stuck in one of these negative thought patterns, if you're feeding that evil wolf of anger, jealousy, hatred, lies, illusions, then one of the things you can do, so there's a couple different, thank you, Clinton. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. So the first way is, it's called, Tony Robbins, he does this all the time. So this is like a pattern interrupt. So if you are in a negative pattern, so what he did was, this lady, she was at one of his conferences and she starts crying. I don't even remember the situation, but she's crying, and then he was like, stop being on yourself, like you're so it's just crazy, right? But he was like, yeah, you're like you're peeing so much out of your eyes. And so it was just something like, what? And she starts cracking up. And so then what happens is, now when she has that thought, instead of thinking that negative thought and like just letting that pattern go, what she does is she now thinks of like, oh yeah, stop peeing out of your eyeballs. And it's like, what? And then so she remembers being there. So that's like a total pattern interrupt. So you got to interrupt that pattern. And then another thing to interrupt the pattern is what Lisa Nichols does is she'll kind of like slap, so she'll like slap her leg when she's thinking a negative thought pattern, and she's like, pause. So she's pausing on that negative thought. And then when she's ready, so instead of saying that negative thought or staying in that thought loop, she'll smack her right leg when she's ready and say, okay, go. Now she can, like, instead of reacting, she'll respond in a way that's appropriate and truthful, instead of feeding into negativity. So those are two different methods you could use. If you are getting yourself stuck feeding the negative evil wolf, then you can pattern interrupt and either think of a totally different thought pattern, or you can use those like leg triggers as Lisa Nichols does. So yeah, so that was which wolf are you feeding? Thanks for the hearts. And then, so as I was thinking about this wolf that's on Wall Street, I love this like pump chest or fist pump to the chest. It just kind of like pumps you up. Eric Thomas was doing it at the Influencer Summit. So he's like, I can, I will, I must, and it was like really powerful. So whenever I'm, just getting in my head, if I'm like having any kind of like negative thoughts, and I just go back to that. And so another lady, Jamie, so if you guys were there, you'll remember, but she had this alter ego as a squirrel. And so Jamie's the one that has or had it cosmetics, and she sold it to L'Oreal for $1.2 billion in cash, like one of the biggest deals that they've ever done. And this was like just in 6 years. Like the first 3 years she wasn't making any money, like like making money just to barely stay afloat, wasn't even paying herself. But it's a great story. But her alter ego is the squirrel. And so if you know the squirrel, so the squirrel, it's not your ordinary squirrel. The squirrel, the squirrel, it's got some big balls. So it's a brave squirrel, ready to tackle anything. So whenever she is go into a meeting or something that's really, really important, she takes on that alter ego and she becomes that squirrel. And so I thought it was so funny. And I know Beyonce, who's Beyonce's alter ego. So it's Sasha Fierce, right? So when she's getting on stage, she says she's normally kind of an introvert, like shyer person. But then, as she's singing, she had to like take on this, this alter ego of Sasha Fierce. And then Nicki Minaj has Roman. I'm not even going to try to attempt the accent, even though I love accents. But yeah, so sometimes you have to like take on this persona. I mean, if you can, live your self-image. I mean, we all want to have ultimately the best self-image. And so I think I'm done a self-image lesson on here on a Tuesday with Terri, but if I haven't, I'll definitely do one, because self-image is so important on how you show up, how people perceive you, how much you accomplish in the world, how your life's gonna go, really. But yeah, in certain situations, you really have to step up to the plate and maybe take on this alter ego identity, right? Okay, so anyways, that's the Tuesdays with Terri. Thanks for watching. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, take care. Bye.